Analysis of the different tendencies of Chinese and Western media toward China's epidemic prevention policy. COVID-19 pandemic has brought to light the striking differences between Chinese and Western media in their reporting on China's efforts to curb the spread of the virus. With the global impact of the pandemic, it is imperative to understand these conflicting tendencies as they shape how the world views the said country's response to the outbreak. Chinese media is known to present a more auspicious view of the measures undertaken by the government, whereas Western media, on the other hand, have a tendency to be more critical and analytical in their approach. In the early phases of the pandemic, Chinese media place emphasis on the country's swift and decisive action, pinpointing the measures taken by the government to contain the spread of the said virus. Meanwhile, Western media focused on the limited transparency and lack of information being made available to the public, thus creating a negative view of China's response. As the pandemic went on, both media continued to report on the measures being taken, with Western media becoming increasingly critical of China's handling of the outbreak, whereas Chinese media continued to highlight the government's efforts to contain it. This analysis aims to delve deeper into the tendencies of both Chinese and Western media toward China's epidemic prevention policy and the impact these tendencies have had on public perception. The media landscape in China is dominated by state-owned or controlled outlets, which leads to a highly regulated and censored reporting environment. This has resulted in Chinese media presenting a more favorable view of the government's efforts to curb the spread of COVID-19. For instance, Chinese media outlets have been quick to highlight the speed as well as the efficiency with which the government quarantined cities, established medical facilities, and distributed protective equipment. These reports have aided in the creation of a sense of confidence in the government's capability to handle the crisis. Nevertheless, this positive depiction of the government's efforts has also been met with criticism from some quarters, who argue that it fails to offer a comprehensive picture of the situation on the ground. Critics argue that censorship, as well as media control, has barred critical reporting on the government's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, leaving out vital aspects such as the mismanagement of resources, lack of transparency, and the cover-up of key information. Regardless of these criticisms, the positive reporting by Chinese media has had a profound effect on shaping public opinion in China. Besides, the coverage has aided in creating a sense of unity and collective responsibility in tackling the disease, which has been instrumental in encouraging the public to follow the government's measures and protocols. Thus, it can be said that the tendencies of Chinese media towards the government's epidemic prevention policy have had a significant impact on public perception, creating a positive image of the government's efforts to handle the crisis, but also leaving room for criticism and debate. The approach taken by Western media towards China's epidemic prevention policy is in sharp contrast to that of Chinese media. Western media has a tendency to adopt a more critical stance, placing focus on exposing the lack of transparency and accountability in the early stages of the outbreak, as well as the slow response from the government in releasing information about the virus. Besides, this critical reporting has also shed light on instances of censorship and restriction of freedom of speech, especially with regard to journalists reporting on the said outbreak. This critical viewpoint is grounded in the values of freedom of expression and press freedom that are held in high regard in democratic societies. Western media is viewed as playing a significant role in holding the government liable, and reporting on the government's response to the pandemic is no exception. By taking up a critical approach, Western media aims to offer the public a more comprehensive picture of the situation on the ground and to pinpoint any shortcomings in how the government handles the outbreak. Nevertheless, this critical reporting has not been without its own criticisms. Some argue that Western media has been too quick to judge and criticize China's response to the pandemic without fully comprehending the intricacies of the situation on the ground. Others argue that the critical reporting has been influenced by political as well as ideological biases, resulting in an inaccurate and misleading depiction of China's efforts to avert the spread of the virus. The differing tendencies of Chinese and Western media towards China's epidemic prevention policy have far-reaching repercussions for how the world perceives the said country's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The positive depiction of the government's efforts by Chinese media can foster admiration and support among the Chinese population, but it also propagates mistrust and skepticism among international audiences. On the other hand, the critical perspective of Western media can result in greater scrutiny and criticism of the government's handling of the outbreak, but it also certifies accountability and transparency. It is vital that media outlets in both China and the West strive to offer accurate, balanced, and fair reporting on the epidemic prevention policy put in place by China. By doing so, they can aid in building trust and promoting mutual understanding between China and other nations, as well as among their own populations. Additionally, it is also important for media consumers to be discerning and critically assess the information they receive. This includes being aware of the biases and motivations of media outlets and putting into consideration multiple sources of information when forming opinions. By taking a critical and informed approach, media consumers can make more informed decisions and play a role in shaping public perception. The media plays a critical role in shaping public perception, particularly during times of crisis. The way the media reports on China's epidemic prevention policy echoes the values as well as the premises of the media itself. Besides, it has the power to influence the attitudes and opinions of audiences globally. It is thus essential for media outlets in both China and the West to be mindful of their effect and strive for accuracy, balance, and fairness in their reporting. Moreover, it is also important for these outlets to provide context and historical background to their reporting, as this can help audiences better understand the complexities of the situation. This can include looking into the cultural, political, and economic factors that have contributed to the current situation and exploring the historical relationships between China and other countries. In addition, media outlets should also strive to provide a platform for diverse voices and perspectives, allowing for a more nuanced and well-rounded understanding of the situation. In an increasingly interconnected world, it is important for these particular outlets to be aware of the effect that their reporting can have beyond their borders. This is particularly true in the case of China's epidemic prevention policy, as the response to the COVID-19 pandemic has had global implications. By being mindful of the impact of their reporting, media outlets can help to foster greater understanding and cooperation in the face of a global crisis. Conclusion: this analysis has showcased the intricate and nuanced ways in which media influences public perception of a crisis. The positive depiction of the government's efforts by Chinese media and the critical perspective of Western media each have their benefits and drawbacks. Nevertheless, it is the media's responsibility to aim for accuracy and balance in their reporting. By doing so, the media can play an essential role in forming a clear and accurate picture of events for the world.